Hello and welcome to a special edition of Varsity360. You can see we have almost the whole crew here. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined from my left Will Denner and Tim Martinez, and we are here for a special edition from the First Pacific Financial Studio where we are going to unveil the all-region football team for 2023. And this is an exciting project that we look forward to every year. It kind of is the capstone of the fall sports season, and we love the opportunity to recognize some of the best football players in the area and cast a spotlight on the seasons that they've just had. So we are going to reveal that team here today. Obviously, the publication will come out online on Saturday and in the print edition of the Columbian, but let's get right to it. But before we start announcing who these selections are, Tim, why don't you take us through the process of how we go picking our all-region team?
All right, the selection process is kind of a two-pronged approach. First off, the four of us and staff, the three of us plus Meg Wachnick, we all met last week, and we all came into the meeting with our own individual selections for the all-region team. In addition to that, we sent out a ballot to the coaches, and we got pretty good response. We got about 17, 18 responses out of about 24 or 25 coaches that got the ballot. The ballot that we sent to coaches was based off the all-league teams, the first team all-league teams, and we sent by position according to the all-league teams. And but the final selections, we were not beholden to those positions, which the feedback that we get from that allows us to make some of our decisions. There were some times when we had our own decisions about who we thought should make the team, and we looked at the coaches' selection and we thought, well, this particular player got a lot of support from the coaches, so it changed our thought process. Mm-hmm. And there's other times when we looked at the coaches' selection and it didn't really jibe with what our selections were. And so, so we're not beholden to a position. So there'll be some players who are selected at a position that they weren't on the ballot for the coaches to select. And that's because a lot of times with the all-league team, that a player who plays two positions may only get selected to the first team at a offensive position or at a defensive position. Sometimes they're very good at both. I think coaches on a lot of times the all-league team, they're trying to get as many names as they can onto that team. And so that they try to spread that out. So we kind of took that into consideration. So there are some players who maybe made the team at a position on the opposite side of the ball from where they were on the ballot. So just as an overall thing, and this is true with all of our all-region teams, there are going to be players on who got left off this team. So are there deserving players who deserve to be on this team who didn't make the team? Absolutely. But as I tell people all the time, if that wasn't the case, there wouldn't be a point in putting this team together in the first place. So a lot of moving parts, especially when you're working with different classifications. The other thing about the all-league teams is the all-league teams are selected based on regular season competition, and our selection for all-region includes the entire playoff run as well. So that also sort of impacted some of our decision-making.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's go to our first position group that we're going to unveil, and those are the defensive backs. We have four selections at defensive back, starting off Riley Artis of Skyview, Angel Lopez of Battleground, J.J. Thompson of Mountain View, and Joe Kalarami of Seton Catholic. So congratulations to our four all-region defensive backs. What stood out to you about any of these players that you were able to see over the course of the season?
I'll start with Joe Kalarami, a great two-way player for Seton Catholic. I think a really hard-hitting, good coverage, just a big-time playmaker at defensive back. A big reason why Seton Catholic had the turnaround that they did this year to get all the way to the 1A state semifinals. Reaching new heights for this program this year.
Yeah. Also, among the coaches, the Riley Artis got a lot of support from the coaches. It got support from I think all of us as well. So it was a pretty, a good selection on that part. And then also J.J. Thompson also got a lot of recognition from within the coaches, and I think we had him on our ballots as well. And then Angel Lopez, I think there were like a lot of players from Battleground that we were looking at selecting, and he was a player that I think in games that we saw Battleground play stuck out to us.
Well, I was able to see Battleground a lot early in the season, and at that time, Battleground's defense was really setting the tone. They pitched a couple of shutouts to start off their season, and really announced to the rest of Southwest Washington that Battleground was a program on the rise. And Angel Lopez from that defensive back position, basically hunting down those balls and coming up with some key interceptions that really turned the momentum toward the favor of the Tigers in those early games, I think really stood out to me.
And he led the team in interceptions. I think he had 3 on the season. And one of the biggest moments that stands out to me is he kind of came through with a game sealing pick 6 against Union, which was a huge moment for them and really kind of made the push for them to be able to get to the postseason this season.
And you talk about other players that make an impact from a defensive back position, even though they go 2 ways. I look at J.J. Thompson, a 4-year starter, and really what that defense at Mountain View able to stay so consistent, running off 9 consecutive wins if you consider the postseason.
Right.
That was really, I thought, a tone setter for JJ at that position.
And he was named both first team all-purpose player and defensive back, so another really versatile player, obviously, in our area.
All right. The next position group we'll go to is, there were some really strong players and selections that I thought were among the linebackers here. It's so hard to pick just 4 of them, but the all-region linebackers of this year: Nico Spear of Camas, Aiden Denbo of Mountain View, Kellen Wiggins of Skyview, and Jacob Champagne of Battleground. I think you could make a case for a defensive player of the year for a couple of these guys.
Well, yeah. Again, in the ballot that we sent to the coaches, I made an error, and I put Aiden Denbo at defensive line, where he was actually a linebacker. So, but he was the defensive player of the year in the 3A Greater St. Helens League, and Nico Spear was the defensive player of the year in the 4A Greater St. Helens League. Jacob Champagne was kind of like, sometimes we put a player at a position, but it's really their all-around game. I think we talked about that with J.J. Thompson. Some of us had Jacob at a running back position in our selections, and so we wanted to find a spot for Jacob because we thought he made such an overall impact to that Battleground team this year. And that's why we put him on here on this spot.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at his numbers at running back, he was just kind of a little bit behind the leaders statistically in the area. But considering how he was kind of the engine that made that team go, and that extended to the defensive side of the ball. So obviously that linebacking core at Battleground really, I thought, was a tough group this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Between him and Cody Huntsinger and Cody Clark and Noah Curry, really a stellar group, and one of the reasons why Battleground had the defense they did, and you guys alluded to it. I mean, Champagne was just a really tremendous leader for them this year, and I think, again, a big part of the turnaround that their program had. You look at Aiden Denbo, too. I mean, last week you guys were talking about all the memorable moments, and that goal line stand on the 2-point conversion, that was all Aiden Denbo, and to come up with plays like that on a consistent basis, those are some of the things we look for, I think, too, when making these selections, is just how these players perform in the biggest moments, and Denbo always did that.
Well, he just passes the eye test. You look across at that starting 11 on Mountain View's defense, and you're like, I'm going to keep an eye on that guy because that guy looks like a man among boys.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And then, Kellen Wiggins, I think for all the preseason hype that Skyview's offense got, their playmakers, the defense is really what helped them reach the success that they had, and Kellen Wiggins was right in the middle of all of that. And again, I think it's another, he sort of represents part of that, because that Skyview defense, when there were other players that we could have sent the nod to on this one, but Kellen's kind of stuck out for us.
Yeah, how many times was I following a game and looking at an update, and it's like fumble recovered by Kellen Wiggins, and it's just a guy that always seemed to be around the ball. And we should talk about Nico Spear too. I mean, for a Greater St. Helens League Defensive Player of the Year, Camas, they did not take a step backwards at all in the 4A Greater St. Helens League, and I gotta think that defense led by Nico was a big reason.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the captains and leaders of their team, and I think a player that guys really rallied around. And I mean, when you look at the fact that they lose their first game and their last game, and in between win every one, and their defense, man, they just had some weeks there where they looked absolutely dominant, honestly.
Yeah. All right, our next position group, we're going to unveil the defensive line. 4 selections here, starting with Aiden Jones of Camas, Rhea Tua of Skyview, Ryan Kowalik of Le Center, and Danny McDonald of Ridgefield. And boy, again, great talent in this, but I think it's worth starting with Ryan Kowalik, the big lineman at Le Center. He's going to play offensive line in college, but it made sense when we constructed this team to put him at defense. Tim, why don't you talk about why?
Yeah, well, we had just so many offensive linemen on the ballot and trying to consideration. And, we were looking for the players who, we could have moved several of them into this position. And we just kind of thought, this is something that Ryan did a lot this year that he hadn't done previous year because of injuries or whatnot. And I think it kind of spoke to Le Center's defense this year and how they played. And we kind of wanted to put a nod toward the Le Center defense on here. And so that's why we plotted Ryan on the defensive line.
Yeah. Other players in this group that stood out to me, Ria Tua might be one of the best edge rushers that I saw this season for Skyview, always hounding the quarterback, making life miserable for offensive tackles. If you're going to mount a pass rush, so often it comes from that defensive end position. And Ria Tua was about as good as they come this season.
Yeah, and he battled some injuries mid-season, but still made an impact with them down to the Storm's run to the 4A quarterfinals. And kind of a similar thing for Danny McDonald at Ridgefield as well. He was the 2A Greater St. Helens League defensive MVP. He had a stress fracture, I believe, in his lower back that held him out for the first 2 games of the season, but came back and made a really big impact. Ridgefield was a little thin in experience at a few positions, but line was not one of them. McDonald, I think, was one of 4 returners on the offensive line and a pretty experienced defensive line as well.
And we got to, obviously go with Aiden Jones and that defensive line of Camus. Just how stout were they this year?
Well, they were really good. Going all the way back to the game 1 with Yelm, when they lost the game, I think it was 8-7 or something like that. They kind of played really good defense the entire season. I think you look at some of their scores in the games that teams scored on them, they kind of scored late after the game had been decided. And in the league, in the 4A league games, they were just dominant the whole way through that. So, Aiden Jones, big part of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps it up for our defense. Before we go to the offense, we have a couple of positions that we want to recognize, and that is the all-purpose player and the place kicker / punter. Why don't we start with place kicker / punter, and that goes to Kobe Johnson of Washougal. He's been there for several, or at least 3 years that I can remember. Very accurate, can do it all. But the thing is, we never really got to see him punt because Washougal doesn't punt. So he definitely showed off from a place kicking position.
Yeah, he's worked on his craft for a few years now and going to specialist camps and everything. And he's just been a really reliable special teams player for them. And I think, like you said, he didn't punt a lot, but when he was kicking, I remember there was that game against Bay when he kicked an extra point over the locker rooms at Kiggins Bowl, and just has tremendous range and a very accurate kicker. And he's been really dependable for them for a few years now. Yeah,
he was a player that I think was, a finalist for this position last year. Mm-hmm. And we decided to go a different direction last year. So I think coming into this year, we thought, the contributions he made in the kicking game for Washougal were big this year.
Next, our all-purpose player, Raphael Bauman of Hudson's Bay. And this was an interesting decision because you have to take into account, obviously, a player that contributes not only offensively, but perhaps defensively and especially special teams. And there are a number of players in Clark County who fit this bill. But Raphael Bauman, I just remember the big kickoff return he had in that game against Ridgefield that ended up being the game winner pretty much. Also a threat to score on offense from basically anywhere on the field with that breakaway speed, and then also playing in Hudson's Bay's defensive backfield. What led us to consider Raphael Bauman the all-purpose player of the year?
Yeah, again, I think as we were coming down trying to select, some of us had him slotted in at running back, and others, a defensive back. And we just thought that his overall game he deserved to be on this team someplace. Yeah. And so the all-purpose position seemed to work out really well because, again, he had so many huge plays, big plays, long plays, both returning interceptions for touchdowns and kickoff returns, punt returns, and then the running game itself.
Well, we debated too. It's like I think Joe Colorami was also a player that we were considering for this position, and it just goes to show how, especially when you look at Class 2A or 1A, what an impact player can make in multiple facets.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, now we go to the offensive players, and we'll start with those big guys up front, the offensive line, and we have 5 positions that we have chosen for this, starting with one of the best that we've seen over the last 2 years, Carson Osmus of Camas, headed to Washington State. Next is Alexander Cedarstrom of Skyview. Next, another college-bound offensive lineman, Peyton Stewart of Kelso, headed to Oregon State.
Well, yeah,
He decommitted.
Oh, decommitted. Yeah. Okay, well, he'll
he's
end
going
up
someplace.
Yeah.
He's going someplace. We don't know where yet.
And another D1 guy, Fox Crater, committed to Oregon, the big offensive lineman from Evergreen. And then Ty Talea of Hudson's Bay. Let's start with Ty and sort of the overall performance of Hudson's Bay offensive line and how important that group was to a very successful year for the Eagles.
Yeah, I think we kind of felt like somebody needed to be picked from Hudson's Bay on that offensive line this year because they were so instrumental to their success. And for Ty Talea Jr., he's played right guard primarily for them. He's now been twice named first team all-league guy. And I would say probably the most, physically imposing of the group, but just kind of your classic workman-like offensive lineman that puts his head down and does his job. And he was a standout for them, and their whole offensive line this year really set the tone for that team.
Right. Fox Crater dealt with some injuries, but still, you talk about a guy that you notice once he steps on the field, that's Fox, just how big and when he's healthy, how mobile he is.
Yeah, it's, that was one of the things that we considered when we talked about making these selections. We were like, well, he missed some games with injuries. How does that impact our decision? From the coach's standpoint, they had seen enough and they voted for him overwhelmingly. We said, okay, well, good. We'll put him on. We had him on our list. Sometimes you have to factor that into the decision-making process, how much of an impact they have actually on the field. And when he was on the field, he made a huge impact, and I think Evergreen's offense reflected that when he was on the field.
Talk about a player and a lineman group who made a huge impact progressively as the season went on, and that was Kelso and that line led by Peyton Stewart. I mean, that was a team that no one really wanted to face at the end of the season because of how good their running game had become with Aiden Mintanya, starting off a little slow, but then by the end of the year, he was as dangerous as any running back in the area. And a lot of those big runs came running behind Peyton Stewart in that line.
Yeah, Kelso has a strong tradition of line play, and Stewart was, he's been kind of on the rise for a few years now, just a really athletic guy. He's a good basketball player as well, much like Fox Crater. And it was actually interesting watching Evergreen and Kelso play and seeing those two match up on the offensive and defensive lines respectively. And to circle back, I mean, Stewart, he's kind of had an interesting recruiting journey as well. He was committed to Northwestern in the summer and then decommitted, went to Oregon State. And then obviously after Jonathan Smith left, he once again opened his commitment, but he's poised to land somewhere great. And he's been a stellar lineman for them.
Alexander Cedarstrom of Skyview, again, he was a guy that I think, when you noticed a big play being broken, he was usually in the area, kind of, pushing a guy out of the way or opening a hole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you kind of sit back and a lot of times when you're at a game, you usually talk to the quarterback, the running back, whatever, and you want to go find an offensive lineman. And so you start watching the game a little bit closer on the offensive line, like who's making the plays at the line. And I remember a couple of games going out and seeing Alexander just making some big blocks to open things up for them. And so he, again, sort of the representative of that line and the way they played this year.
And finally, Carson Osmus, the standout player of a offensive line group at Camas that we, collectively tagged as being one of the more elite position groups in the area. I mean, you talk about a strength in that offense. It was that offensive line for Camas.
Yeah, I believe they returned all 5 starters this year from last, and Osmus was their left tackle, and really another just great leader for Camas. One of the things that kind of impressed me most and kind of spoke to his high character was how he he responded during losses. I think he spoke to the media during both and was really kind of, frank and kind of reflective about what Campus needed to do better. And I think, it just spoke to his high character and how much he was able to lead that team this year. And he'll be a great addition to Washington State as well.
Definitely. The next position group, this was an exciting group to pick, our wide receivers. We have 4 of them, starting with Gavin Packer of Skyview, Trenton Swanson of Camas, Sam Evers of Washougal, and Aiden Nicholson of Mountain View. And boy, you can make an argument that any one of these 4 players would be the most talented player on their team and really the impact player that made him go. Obviously, Sam Evers at Washougal, you could maybe step back away from what I said because Holden B is obviously kind of the cog of that offense. But so often when Washougal needed a big play, it was Sam Evers coming up with it.
Yeah, I mean, he's their go-to target, obviously has been for a couple of years now, and just tremendous catch range, too. I remember, I think it was the district playoff win against Aberdeen. He catches their first touchdown with a defender draped all over him and just kind of a one-handed snag that really kind of gave them momentum, and he topped 1,000 receiving yards. I believe that might have been one of, if not the highest in our area.
Also, he was the receiver that Holden B targeted in the 2A Greater St. Helens League tiebreaker when they needed a touchdown to extend and have a chance to eventually win against Hudson's Bay. It was Sam Evers making that catch. And so obviously favorite target of a great quarterback, you're going to end up with some great yards. Yeah. Going on, talk about Aiden Nicholson, another guy who kind of, endured some injuries, but when he was healthy, he had big play potential that could, ignite an offense from anywhere.
Yeah, he's, I think at any time they needed a big pass play, they were looking at Aiden Nicholson, usually right down the middle, the middle of the field, and when you saw the ball go down the middle of the field, you kind of knew that Aiden was going to be on the other end of that reception, and he was always making big plays, big run after the catch, just a talented all-around player. Well,
and he's a guy too that you could sort of flex at tight end. If for those of you tuning in or reading later, what about the tight ends? There aren't that many true tight ends among teams in our leagues, but Aiden Nicholson's got some good height. I think he's 6'2", 6'3".
Yeah.
And so he's a guy that Mountain View would flex at the tight end position. And so he can kind of check that box if you need.
Yeah.
The next 2, again, just all around great players at multiple positions. You could probably tag these 2 players as all-purpose players, obviously, but let's start with Trenton Swanson, just kind of Camus's do-everything guy.
Yeah, he was the 4A Greater St. Helens League co-MVP along with, or I should say offensive MVP, along with quarterback Jake Kennedy of Skyview. Just a really high-volume receiver, and, for a first-year starting quarterback like Jake Davidson at Camas, a really reliable target for him as well. But then, of course, Swanson's a great defensive back. He's been a punter for them. He can return punts and kickoffs. I think there was one game this year against Kamiak where he actually scored on offense, defense, and special teams. Yep. So a real true all-around guy, but on his receiving talents alone, more than deserving of an all-region spot once again.
Yeah, and then the final player in this group, Gavin Packer of Skyview, just a junior. He's going to be potentially one of the best players in the area next year, but a great all-around season for Gavin Packer, an impactful season at multiple positions. Tim, what stood out among Gavin Packer's highlights this year?
Gavin started out the year, I think he had a hamstring injury early in the year, and so he didn't play the first couple of years, and and Skyview gutted through a couple of tough wins against I think it was Jesuit in week 1. I think they played River in week 2. And then, once he got in and got healthy and got going, that offense really sort of took off. And, a game that really stuck out for me that I was at was the week 10 by-district playoff game with Bethel, when they just kept throwing Gavin Packer screenplays and letting him go and take off and score touchdowns. And then, there was a kickoff return, I think, to start the second half that, was going to bounce into the end zone, but he decided to go back and pick it up. And you just kind of saw it because it was coming straight towards me. I can just kind of see the alley as it was coming towards me, come racing doing for a touchdown. So, he is, again, another, like you said, another all-purpose player, could kind of do things from a lot of different spots in the field. It was, he put in a lot of work in the offseason to make himself stronger and a more, a bigger target. And he just made great play after great play.
All right. Okay, going on to the running backs. We have two of them. And again, this was a tough decision because there was just a glut of great running backs in the area this year. But the two we settled on, Porter Drake of Mountain View and Jacob Williams of Seton Catholic. Porter Drake, boy, talk about some numbers from the running back position. What does that say about the position the season he put together?
I mean, I didn't cover Mountain View a whole lot, but it seemed like every game that I saw, just a headline. I mean, just ridiculous, statistics on the ground. It seemed like every other game, if not every game. And between him and I believe his name is Jaden Brown, their other running back, just a really talented tandem. But Porter Drake ended up just having a stellar year, and he ended up being co-offensive player of the year in the 3A Greater St. Helens League, along with his teammate, quarterback Cash Cook.
Yeah, I mean, broke the 1,000-yard plateau, 1,188 yards, and 14 touchdowns. He had some monster games.
And he was a hard runner. He was a hard runner to bring down. He isn't an especially big guy, but he was just gutty and would, there were games that I saw him play where he would get 20, 25, carries in there. And I think he kind of also carries, this honor for his offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. None of them made our team, even though, some of them was a hard decision not to put on. I think Porter sort of carries that recognition, and I'm sure he would also credit his offensive line to that. But had some big games where, over 20, I think that maybe 3 or more 200-plus yard rushing games. Just a really big part of Mountain View's success this year.
All right. Another guy that I think really is representative of the overall team success is Jacob Williams. Over 1,000 yards rushing. Again, there were so many playmakers on that Seton Catholic team that outlasted every other Southwest Washington team in making it to the 1A state semifinals. But Jacob Williams, a hard runner, really going behind, an offensive line that maybe isn't as big as some of the other ones around, but he always find a way to make plays, it seemed.
Yeah, I thought he was arguably, their most valuable player on offense for stretches this season in the games I saw, at least. And, like you said, just a really hard runner and this kind of upright physical style that just a tough guy to bring down. And for Seton, to have a guy like that you can really just turn to and feed for carry after carry when maybe the passing game isn't totally firing on all cylinders. It seemed like Jacob Williams responded to that challenge every time.
Yeah, I think especially early in the season, it took a little while for Seton's passing game to kind of hit its stride. Mm-hmm. Jacob carried the load a lot in the early part of the season. I saw him against La Center mid-season in the big game. He played a big role in the rain where it's a little bit harder to pass. He again was another just a hard runner and a hard guy to bring down and earning a lot of hard yards.
Okay. Our all-region quarterback of the year, and this was maybe the toughest decision that we had to make of any of these position groups. Only one, and it is Holden B. of Washougal. This was a tough decision, him or Jake Kennedy of Skyview. Almost, Tim, why don't you tell you, it was basically split between the coaches.
Yeah, it was pretty split. I think a lot of the 4A, 3A kind of leaned toward Jake Kennedy, and a lot of the 2A coaches, leaned toward Holden B. We were split ourselves. I think we left this position last as we were kind of going through the process. Like, well, we'll get back to this one. It's a little bit odd because last year Holden B was our player of the year for all region team. And so it'd be kind of weird to come back next year and not even have him as the quarterback. He had a fantastic season. I think he combined for 48 touchdowns, either passing or running. The Panthers really leaned on Holden this year. I think last year they had Liam Atkin, who was a all-region running back for them, and that sort of consistent running. The running game took a little bit while to develop for Washougal, and a lot of times it was Holden B running the ball. And I especially I watched him in his final game up in Ording, and he did everything he could to help that team try to advance, and it was just a special player.
Well, and when Washougal stumbled this season, it wasn't because of what they were doing on offense. It was usually because maybe their defense wasn't clicking the way that that they had hoped. But like you said, Holden B did everything that was asked of him, and for me, that's what sort of tipped the balance in his favor was just some of the ungodly statistics that he put together. I mean, would he have by far the leading passer this season? And I don't have how many yards he ended up with. I don't think we got every one of Washougal's games in our stat database, but even without that, he was by far and away the most prolific passer in the area.
And a top 10 rusher, among all players, running backs included. He played defense for them, which you don't always see from the quarterback position, but they needed him really to help in the defensive backfield as well. And yeah, I mean, I think, you can get into the debate kind of the team kind of finish too. And obviously Skyview went a little further this year than Washougal, but I think when it comes down to it, Holden B still earned it, and even when they had some bumps in the road mid-season, they had that loss to Woodland to open the league schedule, and I believe actually he got hurt in that game, which obviously hurt them, and then they lose to Ridgefield, but they still rallied back, and he's been a great leader for them, and I think he's the guy that got them as far as they did, and to me, that's a deserving thing.
Well, and I think we posed the question when the four of us, Meg Wachnick, who, if you haven't been following along, she has started a 2-month trip to help some people in Honduras. So that's the only reason why she's not here. But the four of us, we posed the decision: if you were drafting a team of Clark County players, who's the one quarterback you would pick? And I would not, start a team without selecting Holden at that quarterback position, just the experience and the productiveness and everything that he brings.
Yeah, and again, I don't think it's a knock on any other quarterback in the area. It's just, kind of a testament to how special Holden B has been these past few years.
Yeah. All right, and that brings us to our final position, the big one, the All-Region Player of the Year. And those of you who have followed high school football in Southwest Washington, this is probably no surprise. It's the do-everything player for the 2A Greater St. Helens League champion, Woodland Beavers, Elijah Anderson. Boy, I can't say enough about the season Elijah Anderson put together.
Yeah, it was, he was a tremendous running back, and the Beavers put him out in receiving, and so he would make big plays catching the ball and running the ball, and just really the center cog to this league championship season that the Beavers had this year.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about, some of the versatile players, but he was definitely among the most. And, again, a lot of big play ability. There was a really key game for them against Hudson's Bay when it was like Woodland, Bay, and Ridgefield all tied near the top of that league, and he explodes for 5 touchdowns. I think 3 of them went for over 50 yards, and that ended up catapulting them into that league title game against Ridgefield, which Woodland ended up winning to capture their first league title since 2007. He did so much for that team.
Well, and especially consider, I think we figured before the year that Woodland was going to be good. That we were impressed with first year that Coach Sean McDonald had put together in 2022, and figured year 2 of that coaching regime would see continued progress. But I don't think any of us thought that Woodland would eventually be the league champions. And it was one of those cases where once you saw just how special of a player Elijah was, then you wouldn't put anything by the Beavers this year and they're more than deserving of being in that league champion position, and will probably be the favorites next year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were getting a lot of buzz, I think, in the preseason. I did the 2A Greater St. Helens League for our tab this year, and it seemed like every coach had something positive to say about Woodland, and obviously Elijah Anderson as well. And then we also learned, Meg Wachnick learned during reporting for this all-region story, that he played the last 4 games of the season with an MCL injury and was determined to stay on the field for their run, not only to finish the league, but then into the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I mean, what better way to cap this group and this fall season than a salute to a special player and by extension a special team, and all of these players are just so deserving. So again, congratulations to everyone who made the team, and even many of those who didn't. 2023 was a special season. A lot of the stories we saw and some of them we didn't see, that goes into everyone, the growth and the, coming together and representing your community. It's just so special. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to pick up the Saturday edition of the Columbian for the print version of this story, or see us online at 360 Preps, and we will see you next week.